Hi, it's me, playing Limbus Company. This video is going over all of the Uptie 4 changes for IDs, specifically, and I'm going to talk about which ones are probably the most likely to be the ones you're going to want to hit Uptie 4, and I'm going to go over the ones that you probably don't want to use your ego shards and threat on, because there are a lot that you probably aren't going to want to, just in general, but there's also a lot that there's no downside to actually uptying them. So to start off, I'm going to flash on screen the entire list in case you don't want to watch this entire video, because it's going to be kind of long and probably a bit boring. The gist of it is, the IDs that got the most benefit out of Uptie this update were the non-Rose Spanner charge IDs. Pretty much all of them got a significant boost, and have jumped up in effectiveness as a result. The other IDs that are really good, you can see there's a couple of Liu IDs. I put 7 Yisang and Shi Don Quixote up there, but I'm really not sure they deserve to be that high. I'm not gonna remake the entire tier list to put them somewhere else, though. There's a lot of IDs in here that do a lot of cool things that just still aren't useful, as you can see on that blue tier there. And there is exactly one ID that actively becomes worse, which I didn't think was going to be possible with a system that was literally just made to upgrade things. But yeah, as you can see, there's a lot of IDs there that are already really good without it, that are just really good and don't gain very much from this. That's the brief overview. I'm gonna go through every ID individually now, in order, starting with Yisang. We're gonna be here a while, just a heads up. I don't want anybody wasting their resources, obviously, and so I'm going to be probably brutally honest with a lot of these, just so you're aware. Starting with base Yisang, he gains 1 base power on skill 1, and the effect is on hit instead of heads hit. Skill 2 inflicts an additional point of sinking on the second coin, and skill 3 gains 1 coin power and inflicts a grand total of 3 more sinking with hits. Frankly, this ID, it doesn't gain enough to be useful, and that's going to be a pretty big theme with the base IDs. There's really only one that's worth uptying, if you even consider that to be. Another thing you're going to notice is, I think every single ID gains a sin resource with their defense skill, but it really isn't going to affect how you play them in most situations, so I'm only going to mention it if it's, like, significant, and usually that'll only happen if this skill gains an effect. In this case, it doesn't. This Yisang is not great. He was never great, though, and it's just keep him at Uptie 3. You get that far for free, and his support passive isn't terrible. Next up, 7 Association Yisang. This is one of the ones that I think it's actually worth uptying, and that's just because he gains a lot of power on most of his skills. Skill 1 goes from a 4 to 10 to a 5 to 12, which is pretty significant. And skill 2 goes from a 5 to 9 to a 5 to 13, which is way better. And if you're running him in a gluttony team, which you're probably going to do, he's going to gain a lot of clash strength just from using riposte anyways. This clash win effect does nothing because this rupture count is going away from the first coin on this skill. Inflicting 1 rupture, okay, that's fine. And Moulinet inflicts 1 rupture and 3 rupture count. Assuming that that's how it works, I still haven't tested it, but I'm guessing that's how it would be. It's overall, this ID gained a lot of good stuff. I would say his main issue right now is clashing. He's not good in the 3rd Mirror Dungeon hard. Whatever. I think he's good enough to be in a higher tier, though, personally. And maybe I'm a little biased towards this ID. You could probably sacrifice him for one of the others. Blade Lineage Yisang. First off, 6 to 13. Wait, that's not math. Yeah, 6 to 13 on Striker Stance is really cool. Gain 2 poise count on use is really useful. Heel turn is still very bad. This is a 7 to 11, which at this point in the game is not really worth it. This skill holds him back so much, in all honesty. And flank thrust becomes an 8 to 14, which is really solid. Gains 2 poise on use and gains an additional 20% damage on crit. And his counter gains big damage increase on crit and a little bit of power, but the counter really isn't worth it. The big thing about this is that he needs to have a lot of poise, and thankfully, he has a combat passive enhance, which says coin power +1 for every 5 poise count. Realistically, you're only ever going to really have one of these because the poise count you gain is not amazing on this, though you are going to gain a lot more from his passive. The issue is you don't want to have a lot of poise to maintain that power. It is still a significant buff for him. This Yisang really needed this, and this makes flank thrust potentially an 8+5, which is an 8 to 23 in this case, which is hilarious. But yeah, he's going to struggle at the beginning of the fights, and once you have enough pride resources, he is going to shoot up in power really quickly. And that is why he is one of the ones that is probably worth uptying if you really like poise. I don't think I'm going to do it personally, but it is definitely an option. At Florest Ego's Spice Bush Yisang is our first instance of a really good ID that does not gain nearly enough to make it worth uptying him. A little bit extra damage on skill 3, a little bit of coin power if the target has sinking count, which is really hard to maintain, so that's not likely to activate, and an additional sinking count on the 3rd coin of the first skill is just not enough to make him any better than he already was, which was very good. So frankly, I wouldn't bother uptying this one, but only because he's already very powerful. That's basically it for Yisang. He doesn't have much to him. LCB Sinner Faust gains 1 base power on all of her skills, and that is it. These skills are all very bad. So I would say definitely do not uptie this. I would actively advise against it. You're just using this for a support passive anyways, usually. It's probably the worst base ID, if I had to make a guess. And there are some pretty bad ones, so this being the worst one out of the bunch says a lot. Definitely not worth it. W Corp Cleanup Agent Faust. This is one of the really good upties. First off, double the charge count on energy cycle and +2 coin power is really nice. Leap gains 1 base power and gives a ton of charge. Even though it spends charge, it actually gives more than it spends, which she really needs. And overcharge gains 1 coin power, and at 5+ charge count, which with these changes you'll probably have, gains 2 power in a clash. So this is a 6 to 17 in a clash, 6 to 15 when doing damage. And her passive now gives random allies 1 charge after an attack as well, which is really good if you're building an entire team with charge. I think personally this is the ID that needed a buff the most and got one of the best buffs you could get out of all the IDs in the game. I would say this one, if you're planning on using a charge team, which honestly I am, I'm not going to uptie it right now though, you're going to want to uptie this ID and use it in the party. This was one of the IDs that previously I would say never use because it just didn't do very much. Now, with Uptie 4, this ID goes from trash to actually pretty solid, all things considered. It's definitely not the best ID in the world still, but it's really, really solid, if not pretty good. It's not an S tier ID, but it is really nice in charge teams. Lobotomy Corp Remnant... I can't speak today. Lobotomy Corp Remnant Faust, or LCR Faust as I usually call her, gains next to nothing. Soul Strike becomes a 3 to 11 from a 3 to 9. This skill is still not great if you compare it to the other Uptie 3 skill ones, but it does gain poise count, which is whatever. And skill 2 gains 1 base power, so 5 to 14 now, and gains 1 poise on the last hit, which doesn't really matter. Gains next to nothing, but this ID was already really good, so it didn't really need a buff. Uptie it if you've run out of things that you think need buffs, and you want to use this Faust over any of the other ones. The one who grips Faust is in the same boat. 2 nails on the first die, on the first coin is new, so this skill inflicts 5, which is really nice. And execution gains plus 20% more damage on the third coin's effect. Aside from that, no changes to her skills, but her support passive and combat passive now gain 2 Fanatic for the allies affected by it if they're from N Corp, which is really good, but by no means necessary in any situation. It's another ID that you'll probably want to uptie it if you want to use this Faust specifically, but you're going to want to prioritize the IDs of characters who need the uptie more, because N Faust is already really good, so you don't really need it. On to Dawn. I will go over Sync Association Dawn again, just for people who haven't seen it. Base Dawn gains 2 coin power on skill 2 and 1 coin power on skill 1, or 1 base power rather. It's really not that significant. It makes her clashing a little more consistent, a little bit more bleed on skill 2, a lot more bleed on skill 3, but overall, this is another ID where you probably just don't want to waste the thread on it. You're going to hear this opinion a lot today. And that's just because there's better Dons. And again, you're just using it for the support passive, which this support passive is really not that good. She Don, personally, I think this one is probably worth doing. Skill 1 giving a bunch of haste is really nice, and the additional coin power makes it a 4 to 11, I think, which isn't bad. It's not amazing. Dual Strike giving more haste and poise is really nice. And Overbreath gaining more skill power at high speed really doesn't matter, but it makes getting her to high speeds a lot more consistent. The only reason I really advise getting this one is because Dual Strike has really consistent clashes, so does Overbreath. The skill 1 is still kind of detrimental. This is the one that's probably the most up in the air for where I would want to put it in the priority list. Definitely, if you're not using this Don, don't bother. If you plan on using it in some teams, I'd say it's probably worth it, but aside from that, maybe pass it up. I just really don't want to make the image again, is all. N Corp Dawn inflicts a lot more nails and a lot more tremor for the most part, and her skill 3 gains 1 base power. This is not an amazing buff. Fanatical Judgment's effect is a lot more consistent, and it's a pretty strong effect, but I think she probably needed a little more in terms of the power department, especially for, like, the high difficulty stuff we have. This isn't an ID you're bringing the railway in any case, and that's really all I have to say about it. It gets some meaningful bonuses, but still probably isn't that useful overall, just because there are now 3 Dons that are better, in my opinion. W Corp Cleanup Agent Don is really good. She gains very few bonuses, but the bonuses are all meaningful, and they all make her a lot better. Specifically, Rip gaining 4 charge means with any combination of 2 of her skills, as long as it isn't 2 rips, you can use Rip Space on turn 3. Or, yeah, turn 3. Turn 2 if you're not in a focus fight. And both skills gain coin power when at a certain charge threshold, which this has always been one of the most consistent charge gaining IDs. And so this ID is one of the really good ones to buff, especially since having W Faust in the party is going to help her a lot. Definitely really good. Sync Dawn gains a little bit more coin power on her first skill, so this is one of the more consistent skill ones. Hits after clash instead of on heads hit after clash, and then the rest of her bonuses are basically just increased damage after winning a clash, which is always nice. This on-kill effect means nothing, because you're already going to be on high sanity, probably. But overall, this is one of the ones that you want to uptie if you like using this Don over W Corp. Personally, It's better if you don't want to bother keeping track of your charge. But aside from that, this Don is probably worse than W for damage, definitely, if you count in rip space. But overall, they're probably around the same, since this one feels ego better. But personally, I would say W Don is more valuable. But this one is good enough and didn't really need very many buffs, so it didn't get many. Ryoshu, one of the better characters before this update, I want to say. Base Ryoshu does gain meaningful buffs, 4 to 14 on skill 2, 4 to, I think that's 11 again on skill 1. Skill 3 is now 5 to 14, and gives poise. This is honestly one of the better base IDs that have been introduced in this update, but honestly, it's still not worth it. All the other Ryoshus are better. You're going to find other ones that just do the same, but more efficiently, so it's really not worth uptying this one. It's more of a support passive filter at this point. 7 Association Ryoshu has the same issue. She gains 2 coin power on both of her skills and a little slash fragility on her counter. She's too frail to use this counter, so it doesn't matter. And the 2 coin power on her other skills isn't meaningful for the most part. It's just not worth uptying this one all the way, unfortunately. Which is not to say the ID is bad, because it is a really good ID. A lot of slash fragility is a lot of slash fragility after all. But she just doesn't gain enough for Uptie 4 to be useful, and Swash doesn't gain any bonuses, so you're probably just as effective at Uptie 3. Kurokumo Clan Ryoshu gains increased damage if the target has a certain amount of bleed count on all of her skills, and the second skill inflicts a lot more bleed count now. It inflicts 3 instead of 1, I believe. Well, let me just double check that. Yeah, 3 instead of 1, and it's guaranteed on hit instead of requiring heads hit. Which is a very meaningful bonus, but in actuality, this ID is just doing more of what it already was doing. It's still quite good, and if you're running a bleed comp, you're going to want it anyways. But compared to the buffs that other IDs get, this one's probably wait until you have your other main IDs uptied and then get this one, I would say. Chef de Cuisine Ryoshu gains basically nothing. She inflicts 1 more bleed and 1 more HP healing down, which the HP healing down barely matters, and gets a little bit more appetite with her first 2 skills, and that is it. To be fair, this Ryoshu didn't need any buffs. She is amazing. And so this is another one where you're going to uptie your other IDs first, but you can get this one because it is no meaningful buffs, but the ID is already super strong. Honestly, I would say you probably don't even want to waste any uptie resources on this. She's already solid, and the buffs she gains mean nothing overall, if I had to say so. The only reason she's higher up is because she was already good. So that's why the tier list is kind of organized the way it is. Meursault is next. Base Meursault gains a little bit of power on everything and a little bit more tremor on the last skill, but overall does not gain enough. Who would have guessed a base ID that doesn't gain enough? Liu Meursault gains a bit of burn infliction, and his second skill gains 1 base power. But his third skill gains plus 1 coin power if the target has 5+ burn, which makes it up to 17, which is very significant. But honestly, I personally don't think that this Meursault has gained enough to warrant uptying until we have better burn ID support. That's just my opinion. You might think it's better, but I've put him in gains no or few meaningful bonuses because, honestly, this was already his best clashing skill. You're not changing anything about that, and he doesn't do a lot of damage to begin with. So it's really not that important to uptie him. Rose Spanner Meursault, kind of in the same boat. He has a bunch of effects that increase your final power and coin power. The problem is that it all goes based on tremor count, and tremor count is actually really tough to keep at high numbers, especially if you're running this ID. So it's kind of counterproductive thanks to him reducing tremor count with his final skill. But it is a meaningful amount of power if you can build up to it. I just personally don't say that it's worth it. There are way better Meursault Uptie, and we're going to get to those shortly. Starting with N-Corp Meursault, because I think he's the worst one out of the bunch. He gains potentially meaningful bonuses in the fact that he gains aggro. And we don't really know how effective aggro is going to be, but aside from that, the bonuses he gains are not important. He is tanky, and if we get an act where there's a lot of slash... Is it slash that he's most resistant to? No, a lot of pierce damage, then he's going to be solid for tanking hits, provided aggro works the way we think it does, in that it will automatically target him with more skills. But aside from that, he doesn't really gain a lot, and his clash power is still pretty bad. So, meaningful bonuses, but he's still not very good. The other two Meursaults, starting with W Meursault, doubles charge count gain on a rip, which is fantastic. Energy cycle gains coin power with enough charge and inflicts more rupture. And Energy's current not only gains coin power, but also gains more coin power with enough charge. His guard gives him 2 charge, which is actually a little bit better. I would say it's still probably not something you're going to use unless you have a hopeless clash. And his passive now gives him charge count after losing a clash, which he can do. And it happens up to 6 times independently of hits taken. So that's kind of nice. To be real with you, this ID is one of the ones that has gained the most usefulness out of all of the Uptie 4s. Energy Cycle was already good damage, and it being a 5-14 helps it quite a bit. Slash Fragility is always good. And Energy Current, since this Meursault is pretty fast, this actually does make you do a lot more damage, even though defense level down is just worse fragile. This is 8 defense level down, and with the changes to how offense and defense level works, that is a very significant damage boost for the rest of your party. So honestly, this Meursault went from terrible to maybe not as usable as W Faust without W Faust in the party, but very strong nonetheless, and honestly, he's one of the better slash IDs now, all things considered. And R-Corp 4th Pack Rhino Meursault, which unfortunately just blows W Meursault out of the water with his Uptie. First off, double the charge gain on Weighty Bash, nice. Double the charge gain on Demolish, and inflicting more bleed count while at 7+ speed. Plus, this bleed count isn't on heads hit anymore, it's just on hit. And then Rhino Ram gains a coin power and also gains another coin power at 10+ charge. This is a 6-21, which is really, really good. And his passive now gives him aggro when he has 5+ charge, which is really nice because he's a pretty bulky attacker. This doesn't change enough to make it worth using, unfortunately. If it gave him aggro, maybe, but his defense really doesn't matter. I think that with an Uptie, this ID becomes one of the highest tier IDs you can have, because it does a lot, and actually manages to hit really hard with his 3rd skill now, whereas before it was just okay. And he gains charge a lot more consistently, so you're going to be using that 3rd skill a lot more too. So yeah, all around, one of the best IDs to hit Uptie 4, just like most of the charge IDs, honestly. Honglu. Base Honglu. Wouldn't you know it, does not gain enough to make it worthwhile. He's still one of the best base IDs, but honestly, at this point, he's pretty well phased out. And you're just going to be using a different Honglu, because let's be real, you probably have one at this point. If you've started, like, let's say 3 weeks into the game, you'll probably have a better Honglu than this. Provided that it's Uptied, I should clarify. Kurikumo Honglu does not gain enough meaningful effects to be worth Uptying. That being said, he is a very good ID for damage. That's about all I can say for him. He inflicts bleed a little bit more consistently, but just not worth it in my opinion. Uptie him if you don't plan on using the other Honglus and you can afford it. Liu Honglu, on the other hand, the changes here mostly is Flowing Flame becomes able to clash. It turns from a 610 to a 614 if the target has 6 burn, and with a burn squad, you're going to have that. Crimson Blaze Fist coin power with burn count isn't nearly as useful. It was already a good clashing skill, but I think if you like running Wrath and Burn stuff, this is probably the Honglu you'd want to uptie. It is the only one that gains anything significant, I'd say, because this is a lot of coin power for this skill, and that's really all I can say about it. Get it if you really like Burn. Aside from that, don't bother. It's another one that was kind of up in the air for me. Ting Tang Gang Honglu gains a little bit of power on Throat Slit. The name of his skill 2 changes for some reason, and both his skill 2 and skill 3 do a little bit extra damage if the target has an amount of bleed. That amount of bleed is really easy to get, but he doesn't need this. Evade. This is a really, really strong evade. This is one of the situations where I will go out of my way to say, this is a defense skill that is worth using if you have only his skill 1 available. Like, you can easily use this over that, and it is very effective. Being able to roll up to 18 is really nice, and it even gives you SP if you successfully evade, and I can't say anything bad about that. That being said, this is another ID where you uptie it if you've already uptied the things that benefit from it more, and you want to use Ting Tang Honglu in your party. If he's part of your core, uptie him. Aside from that, he is definitely good enough without it. And lastly, K-Corp Honglu. He's going to gain a little extra coin power and aggro from his skill 1. And he's going to gain aggro on his skill 2 and a little bit more base power and a little bit more coin power on skill 3. And his defense is also going to give him aggro, but you're not going to want to use his defense too much because it can kill him. In terms of tanking, you're not going to find anything better. But at the same time, I don't think uptying him is going to make him a more effective tanky unit. In my opinion, aggro might be worth it. But aside from that, he's probably good enough as is. You don't really need to uptie him for any reason. That's just my opinion, though. Heathcliff. Base Heathcliff is the exception to the rule. He gains enough. Skill 2 doesn't gain anything significant. But Upheaval gains enough coin power to make this ID actually roll well in most situations. I'd say he's still probably weaker than some of the other IDs you'll see in this video. But if you're going to uptie a base ID, and you really want to use a base ID, this is going to be the one you're going to uptie, because it has really good colors, and Upheaval becomes a very, very strong skill, just in general. And he's definitely better than She Heathcliff, who we are about to look at. So, She Heathcliff gains a very interesting effect. First off, they added poise count to his kit, whatever, and his skills activate at 50% instead of 25%, which still 50% HP or below is not easy to maintain. Sorry I'm yawning, I've been awake a while. 50% skill power, HP, sorry, is not easy to maintain. 10 plus poise count on this ID is not going to be easy to get to, but the real thing is, at less than 50% HP, you gain 1 attack weight. Attack weight is the new number of targets. So with 2 attack weight, you target 2 slots. It's important to remember that it's slots and not 2 enemies. This is now the second ID to have an AoE in its base form, but I still would probably say that you're not going to want to uptie this. It doesn't gain enough, and there are, like, 2 better Heathcliffs, and one of them is base, because the base is better and has the same colors. N-Corp Heath is interesting. He inflicts more nails with skill 1, and that's the only skill that sees a meaningful boost. His passive says that if there are 4 or more units from N-Corp in the team, he gains 1 final power, which is neat. Honestly, though, you don't uptie this unless you really like N-Corp. Not that you would need to. N-Corp Kleinhammer Heath has always been one of the better 2-stars. So I would say that if you really like this N-Corp Heath, and you really like N-Corp, then you're going to want to uptie this one. He's one of the better N-Corp IDs. But aside from that, I wouldn't say it's useful to uptie this one myself. 4th pack Rabbit Heath only gains 1 charge count in his evade, but this is a very good uptie, and the reason for that is that he gains 3 ammo at the start of the turn. And, sorry, at the start of the stage. I need to get that right, because half of the people that play this game don't know how to read. I'm sorry, but it's true. This is not 3 ammo every turn. This is 3 ammo at the start of turn 1, and then it doesn't do anything else. You don't need to have any Sin resources for this to activate. Literally, what this says is Heathcliff's Uptie gives him 3 more ammo, and that is all that the Uptie does. That is significant. That being said, this is one of the best buffs they could have possibly given him without making him completely broken. 3 more bullets is usually 1 or 2 more skills before he completely loses steam in a fight. And that is super important for him because he is one of the best IDs for increasing your team's overall damage output, thanks to how his skill 3 works. This is probably the best Heathcliff ID to uptie. That was never going to change, and the effect is honestly significant. So, yeah. Lobotomy Ego Sunshower Heath, I'm going to quickly mention, this is the only ID in the game that loses sanity after a clash lose, without an effect that says so. And that definitely helps him as an ID. That being said, I still don't think he's that great of an ID overall. His Uptie makes him lose 3 more sinking on losing a clash from Umbrella Thwack, which is nice, but it's still a little slow. Puddle Stomp can hit 15 power now when you're already at low SP, which honestly, this attack, if you roll all tails and have the sinking, it does deal more damage than Amoral Enactment usually. That being said, it's a little inconsistent because it's a tails coins. His 3rd skill unfortunately doesn't gain anything. His counter does give him 2 more sinking on use. So basically what they've done is they've made it a little easier to maintain his low sanity, but personally, this ID does not gain enough meaningful effects to be worth uptying. The best buff he got this update was the sanity change for him, and that is still probably not enough, all things considered. He needs more, and Uptie 4 just isn't enough for him. If you like this ID, because I know there is a lot of people who like this ID, and I can't fault you for that because he is interesting, and frankly, I like the concept too. I just don't like him in practice. Then yeah, you can absolutely uptie this, and you can absolutely see use for him now. But he's still probably inferior to R-Corp Heathcliff in every way, and there are better units to bring, and honestly, his skill 3 needed something to make him a little bit better. But that's just my opinions on the ID. Don't let that scare you from uptying him any further, because he has gotten a lot better. I just personally don't think he's good enough yet. Ishmael. Ishmael is one of the big winners from this update. That being said, base Ishmael, again, doesn't gain enough for it to be worth it. She clashes better than one of the other Ishmaels, though. She Association Ishmael is the only 2-star that everybody has, and it's a very good ID, but it also does not gain enough meaningful stuff for you to uptie it, probably. The counter gaining poise count is significant because you're going to use the counter to get her to low HP. And Catch Breath gaining 2 coin power is very, very good. Don't get me wrong. And honestly, I should probably move this up to gains meaningful bonuses, becomes or remains usable strong. But personally, the fact that Flashing Strike doesn't gain any power means that she was never going to get any better than she already is. Poise count isn't poise, so this doesn't help with her damage very consistently. And you're going to be wanting using Flashing Strike or Catch Breath over Flying Sword anyways, so the change on Flying Sword, give her 1 more poise on low HP, doesn't really matter that much. It's an Uptie if you really like She Ishmael. Aside from that, Uptie one of the other ones. We're going to be going over the good ones too. LCCB Ishmael gets a lot of aggro and gains skill power if the target has a lot of tremor and tremor count. It is an amount of tremor and tremor count that you will reasonably be able to activate those skills. The guard gains, I wouldn't say a meaningful effect, but an interesting effect in that 4 aggro plus 2 more aggro if you have 0 ammo. She does need something when she has no ammo, but I don't think this is it, honestly. And Quick Rounds doesn't gain anything, unfortunately. That was her most consistent skill, so it kind of sucks. And I really like this ID, but I can't justify shilling out resources to uptie it for a better Ishmael, of which there are 3. So I will say that don't bother spending your resources on this one unless you're really fond of Tremor, which I still think needs a little bit more before you can use it much. Else, Lobotomy Ego Ishmael is one of the big losers. She gains aggro on everything now, and her passive gives her twice as much shield. Whatever. But all of her skills gain on clash, lose, inflict tremor, and rupture. It's not even count on any of them, and that is not worth the uptie resources. Do not uptie this. It is not worth it. This ID is frankly not worth it. It's just better base, and not by much, in my opinion. We'll go over Liu first. The uptie on this one allows her to gain 1 more coin power on red kick and frontal assault, and 20% more damage on inner gate elbow strike, and that's all it does. This is still very significant. This is, like, I would say the best ID for a new player to pull, just in general, because it doesn't need team support to be really good, and it does a lot of things really well. The bonus to its coin power is just awesome. And this is one of the... gains a lot of meaningful bonuses, even though she doesn't gain a lot of bonuses. Inner gate elbow strike really doesn't matter. But the other 2 skills just become super consistent, and that's always good. So uptie this if it's your favorite Ishmael. If it's not your favorite Ishmael, probably still uptie this one. And I say that having only one Uptie 4 ID, and that being R-Corp 4th Pack Reindeer Ishmael. This is probably the biggest winner of all of the IDs in the entire game, in my opinion, when Uptie 4 is introduced. First off, Mind Strike gains 1 base power, but that is not what's significant about it. What's significant is the charge count from on-heads hit is now on hit, and she gains a guaranteed 2 charge count on use. This is fantastic, and it's probably... This skill is not the one that got buffed the most. Flaying Surge gains 2 coin power, so this is a 6 to 18 now. 1 more charge count and 1 more sinking count on its effects, which is really solid. Skill 3, Mind Whip, got the most mind-boggling changes out of any skill. First off, 1 coin power is funny. But the big thing about this is, not only did they reduce the charge count requirement to 8, but it also only spends 8 instead of spending all of your charge. So it's actually possible to use 2 controlled Mind Whips in a single turn now. This is just amazing. This is the strongest buff I think we'll ever see to a single identity for the near future, and I'm very much tempting upgrading its level to 35. It's been my probably favorite ID for a while, just for the aesthetic of it. I really like the reindeer team. That's just me. And the fact that it's a charge ID means that all the other charge IDs being buffed buff it indirectly. But the evade now gives charge count on evade, which is very significant because this is a good evade. It's kind of an average evade, but it's an important one. And her combat passive got buffed. The major downside of this passive has basically been removed, because now you gain 1 attack power up for the Gloom Resonance at the start of the combat phase. That hasn't changed, and you only lose SP now if you fail to deal damage. Previously, you would lose the SP as you gain the attack power up at the start of the combat phase, but now that it's that if you fail to deal damage during the turn, you've basically removed the biggest downside that this ID has, and that is just amazing. This ID shoots from, like, in my opinion, low A straight to, like, S+ tier from this, and it is a very viable alternative to Liu Ishmael now, where previously I would say that Liu was just better at Uptie 3. This one has become a fitting rival to it, and that's really how it should be. The 3 stars of the ID should be about on par with each other, in my opinion. Rodion. Base Rodion. I still hate this ID. It gains buffs. It is not worth using your resources on. You might notice that I have 500 Rodion shards, and I am absolutely not planning on using any on this ID. This bleed count is the most important buff that she gets out of all of it. Yep. That's all I can really say about it. Don't waste your ego shards. LCCB Rodion has gained a very interesting effect. I don't think that it makes her viable, but both skills 1 and skill 2 gain if the next skill on the dashboard does blunt damage, skills coin power +2. If you activate this, it changes this from a 5 to 11 to a 5 to 13, and this from a 6 to 8 to a 6 to 12. 6 to 12 is still not fantastic. 5 to 13 is pretty good. Skill 3 gains an additional coin power if the target hasn't been attacked yet. So it changes to a 7 to 17 instead of a 7 to 15. It's a pretty decent skill. I would say this ID needed a little more, probably. Skill 2 still holds it back, even with a 6 to 12. And her colors are bad. Just, frankly, they are not good. So it's been improved a lot. It has still not been improved enough, in my opinion. So I wouldn't suggest using your resources on it. N-Corp Rodion now inflicts nails if the target already has it with skill 1, and skill 3 does more damage for every N-Corp ally that is present. This caps out at 45% increased damage on this skill because you can have all 6 in a fight in the mirror dungeon. And the counter inflicts 1 nails. This ID really needed a buff to skill 2 to be viable at Uptie 4. It unfortunately did not get it, and as a result, probably not a good Rodion to Uptie to 4, in my opinion. It's still a decent ID. It struggles with clashes, and it needed more, is all I'm going to say about it. Vi Rodion gains aggro on all of her skills except the 3rd one, hooray, and gains more poise count, specifically on Clash Lose for the 1st skill, which it's a bad skill, so it can lose clashes. And Focus Defense becomes a 6 to 14, which is actually a decent roll for a skill 2, and guaranteed 2 poise count on it now is really nice. But this ID is still trash, let's be real. It's just not worth it. Don't use this ID. It is interesting that the guard changes to Wrath. I think that's notable, but ultimately not important. And this effect does not make this skill worthwhile. It is still a 5 to 14. Skill 2 clashes better than it, even after the boost. So yeah, still probably one of the worst IDs in the game. I wouldn't call it the worst ID in the game anymore. That's probably base Faust. but this one is still really bad. Kurokumo clan, Rodia. I'd probably be calling her Ryoshu again. I don't care. Sharp Edge gains 3 coin power with 4+ poise. That becomes a 5 to 14, which is a really solid roll range. And it gives poise on hit instead of heads hit. Skill 2 gives you an additional point of poise count, and at 5+ poise, its coin power gains +2, so this changes to a 6/16, which is really good. And Sky Clearing Cut gains, I believe, 2 power? Yeah, 2 power. And deals double damage on a crit, in addition to the +20 damage that 20% damage that a crit would normally give if you have 10+ poise. And her counter gives her poise count now. This has always been one of the better counters in the game if her passive is not active. If it's active, her counter is still kind of bad. That passive should just be disregarded. But this is one of the... I would say this is the best poise ID that actually uses poise, in my opinion. If you're in a bleed team, this is a guaranteed crit at 10 poise, and it's a lot of damage. With support from Blade Yi-Sang's passive, you can easily get 10+ poise count in addition to 10+ poise. It's just it's probably the only poise ID that can maintain her poise count, even consistently getting crits with every coin. And that is super significant. I think this is one of the strongest Uptie 4s you can get, compared to the Uptie 3, that is. Is Rose Spanner Rodia still better? Probably. But this one has its niche now, and I appreciate that as a liker of this identity, personally. I'm going to be uptying this one once I actually have thread again. Speaking of Rose Spanner Rodia, unfortunately, a little bit more charge count is always nice on skill 1. Like, this boosts her up to 6, which is very significant. It's not quite the cutting point. The cutting point is 7 in 1 turn. That is what you would want on this ID, but this is a very big boost to the skill 1. Skill 2 gains 1 coin power if the target has 10+ tremor count. This might be tremor potency. We don't know. There's a little bit of a wording issue with some of these. If it's tremor count, this is basically nothing. But this Rodia, still overall probably the best one. Doesn't gain anything particularly meaningful from Uptie 4. If skill 3 got a bonus, then maybe. But as it is, the most significant thing to note here is that her guard is sloth, and you're not going to be using that. So, yeah, I wouldn't Uptie that one, even if you are going to use it. So on to Sinclair. Probably got done the most dirty out of all of them, starting with base. Wouldn't you know it, it's not enough to make him viable. Ravaging Cut is still a pretty good skill, but it is not enough to hold him up, and his skill 2 gained nothing. So, yeah, it's just not worth it. Zwei Sinclair. Clash lose 2 protection. This is going to help him with survivability, but this skill 1 is bad. Suppress is still bad for clashing. It's a 6 to 10. It gains aggro. It inflicts tremor on clash lose. Oh boy. Strong Strike gives protection to the ally with the least HP next turn instead of current turn, which is a big bonus. And this is a lot of aggro gain. Assuming that, let's say, each aggro is a 10% chance to pull an attack, which we don't know yet, this is going to be guaranteed to pull an attack in focus fights. And that is notable. I would still say that this Sinclair is probably not worth uptying. He just doesn't do enough for your team, even in a Tremor team, even with these new effects. And it's just not worth it, in my opinion. He's definitely better than the next Sinclair now. Los Mariachis Jefe Sinclair. Baile de Rola. I don't know how to pronounce this. I'm sorry. 4+ sinking, coin power +1. 4+ sinking is not a lot, even with this ID. Here's the problem, though. This only puts it to a 4 to 10, and do you really want your sinking to be consumed by this skill? That's my biggest complaint. This is the same issue. It needed coin power. Like, +2 coin power would have made this skill usable. Gaining poise count. This sinking count doesn't matter because it goes away immediately thanks to this skill inflicting sink, being a skill that hits. And the coin power +2 on it, sure. Sinking is still the least supported status effect, though, and unless you're running a team of all sinking IDs, this is not going to happen very often. Skill 3 deals more critical damage. This top half of this doesn't do anything more. With high poise count, you deal more critical damage, and this effect doesn't matter. They needed this ID to lean more heavily into sinking, but they decided to give it more poise effects, and it just suffers as a result. Definitely not worth uptying. You're still only bringing this for a support passive, which is still a really good support passive, for the record. Now we get to the only outstanding case of the entirety of the game. Lobotomy Ego Red Sheet Sinclair is the only identity out of all of them that actively becomes worse if you get him to uptie 4. Now you might be like, oh, but on hit, gain, if target has a rupture, gain talismans instead of on heads hit. First off, this effect is already on this. On the third coin. You don't need that. He gains enough talisman as is. Gaining 1 talisman on hit instead of on heads hit. This is a neat buff. Ultimately not that interesting because it is 5 rupture. But the reason that this ID becomes actively worse is that it changed from spend 5 to give 5 to spend 5 to give 7. The problem is that if you go above 6, it disappears at the end of the turn. Increasing everybody's hits by 5 damage is really, really good. Once you inflict an enemy with 5 talisman, you want to keep it there. Inflicting 7 does not keep it there. And so, this is the only ID in the entire game that becomes worse at uptie 4 as a result of that. It is still a very strong ID at uptie 3. It's one of the stronger 2 stars in my opinion. Do not put it at uptie 4. It is not a good idea. And you don't gain any lore from it. Don't bother. It's still a really good ID though. Blade Lineage Salsu Sinclair. This is an example of an ID gaining a lot, and I mean a lot, of meaningful effects, but unfortunately still not being good enough. So first off, Slice and Stab gains 1 coin power naturally, and at 3+ poise count gains an additional coin power. 5 to 11 is just on par with 3-star identities. It's nice that the skill is usable. I suppose. 2 poise count instead of 1 as well. Actually, that might be... It's already 2. That's not changed. I don't know why that's highlighted yellow. Some stuff is. Slash series gains 1 coin power, making it 6 to 12, which is not great. But the more important thing is, on Clash Win, it doesn't spend poise count with critical attacks landed. That's really significant. That is one of the coolest single effects in the entire game. And unfortunately, it's on this ID, which is sad. It also doesn't gain any more attack power up. I thought it did, but I was just wrong. And then To Claim Their Bones gains 4 coin power, which I think is the biggest buff to power any skill gets in this update. And at 10+ poise count deals 150% more critical damage. Okay. His counter doesn't gain anything significant. His passive says whenever an ally other than this unit gains poise count, it gains 1 poise count at a 50% chance. This is, unironically, a very strong passive on a very meh identity. And it's the passive and his skill 3 that make the identity meh instead of the identity being bad. He's too slow to take advantage of this paralysis, and it's not very much bleed. But this skill hits really fucking hard. That is a lot of damage. But unfortunately, his first 2 skills hold him back enough where I would say, even if it is interesting increases, it's not worth it. And I'm really disappointed by that, personally. You might disagree with that, but that's what I'm going to say about it. It is the most interesting new effects that an ID has gotten. And it has that going for it and basically nothing else. N-Corp Sinclair doesn't gain very much. First skill inflicts 1 more burn. This does not make this skill any better. Third coin, this is all the same and inflicts 2 more burn. If the target has 5+ bleed, this means nothing. The only thing that this ID is gaining is if your entire party is N-Corp, they deal 10% more damage. And this actually applies to the entire party, by the way. That is significant. That matters a lot in all N-Corp scenarios. If you're not running a party of entirely N-Corp, I would say don't bother uptying this ever. He's already one of the strongest IDs in the game, and he just doesn't need it. Though it is cool that he gives a party-wide damage boost, even if it is very low damage boost. Outis. I'm going to say it again. Base Outis didn't gain enough to make her usable. She's still one of the better base IDs, but I just don't... I think this ID has been a bit outclassed, personally. You might disagree with that, but I personally think it's not worth it, unfortunately. Blade Lineage Cutthroat Outis, also in my opinion, not worth it. She has the problem with, at 5+ poise, gain coin power +3. That is up to 13. Unfortunately, she doesn't give enough poise. 1 more poise count from acupuncture. And Decisive Dive activates a lot more often. 50% instead of 30% is pretty useful. This matters not, in fact. This ID needed more poise gain. As it stands, the only way to gain poise with this ID is by using Sun Shower, and she does not feel it. So I would say probably don't bother, unfortunately. G-Corp Outis gains a little bit of power on everything. The first skill needs the target have 5 sinking, which is actually activated already by her 3rd skill, and her 3rd skill inflicts more sinking. Overall, though, I think that the bonuses she gets from this are negligible, and so it's probably, probably not worth uptying, in my opinion. It is still her 2nd best ID. And 7 Association Outis inflicts 1 Rupture on her first skill, which doesn't matter. Field Command inflicts 2 Rupture count on coin 2, which actually is net positive. That is significant. And Exploit the Gap says if the target has 7+ Rupture, which I don't know if that's still hard to get. It might be. Coin power +2. This changes it to, in a clash, this will be 8 to 20. Outside of a clash, it's 6 to 18. And that is really good. If you're going to uptie an Outis, it's going to be this one anyways, let's be honest. I personally don't think that the uptie bonuses here are significant enough for me to prioritize her, but if you really like Outis, definitely uptie this. It is one of the better IDs, I think, to uptie to 4, and definitely Outis' only uptie to 4 that's worth it. And lastly, we have Greg. Greg, unfortunately, didn't win a lot this update. All of his base skills get 1 base power, and skill 2 inflicts 2 Rupture on heads hit, which doesn't matter. It's not worth it, again. Liu Greg. Liu Greg got a lot of significant buffs. Target with 6+ burn, gonna be really easy for burn teams. This still only boosts it to a 4 to 10, which is not great. And the fact that it inflicts double the amount of burn with heads is really nice. Skill 2 gains 1 coin power and an additional coin power if the target has 6+ burn. Rushdown becomes a 5-15 with all of its boosts. And the burn it inflicts is no longer determined by heads hit on the first 2 skills, which is really nice. First 2 coins even. Perfected Palm Strike inflicts burn more consistently, and other than that, the 10% more damage from 6+ burn isn't enough to make it worthwhile. Rushdown has become his best skill. I would say this is an ID that gains significant bonuses, but still is probably not strong enough in most teams. Even burn teams, this guy doesn't do a lot unless he gains Hong Lu's support passive. And in that case, whatever. If you really like burn, you're probably going to want to uptie him. I would personally think it's worth it. RB sous chef Greg. Still unobtainable as of now. First skill gains additional damage if the target has 4+ bind, but it really needed power up. You Fresh Enough does gain 3 coin power if the user's speed is significantly high compared to the target's, so it becomes a 6-17. That's really good for clashing. This skill is very nice now. Butcher Viand, target has 10+ bleed count. 10+ is not easy to get, even with all the IDs that are really good at inflicting it, including this one. And for 1 coin power, it's not really worth getting it up to a 5-13. I would say this is another ID that it's probably not worth uptying. It doesn't even gain anything interesting. It's just a little bit more power on his last 2 skills that's significant, and it's not worth it in my opinion. Rose Spanner, Greg, inflicts more rupture if the target has tremor count. Grease Chains inflicts 2 rupture count, which is a net positive for it finally. That's significant. I know a lot of people like this ID, and I can definitely see an argument for using it. And Let's Grind 'em gains 1 coin power if the target has 5+ tremor count, so it becomes a 4-16. And all of its coins after the first one gain inflict 3 rupture if the target has 5+ tremor count. The problem is it does reduce tremor by 2, so usually these effects will not happen, but if they do happen, and you have enough charge, this is technically net positive rupture, and it is a lot of rupture. It's 2 count with 8 rupture, I believe, yeah. I say, with this ID, it gains enough bonuses to be meaningful, and I still think it's probably not good enough. Greg's IDs have really fallen off recently, unfortunately. And this one is, of course, still outshined by G-Corp, which doesn't need charge. But, to be real with you, Rose Spanner Greg is good. I still just think that you'd probably want to uptie G-Corp in general. First off, 5+ rupture count is not reasonably obtainable right now. Coin power +1 on hack would be really nice, but this skill has been power crept, so who cares? Additional damage with 5+ rupture count is whatever. Basically, the biggest thing that this Greg gains is his healing is more consistent. Eviscerate gains 1 coin power at 5+ rupture count. If that were reasonable, then this skill becomes a lot better. It becomes a 4-16. And that is like a big boost to Eviscerate, but this guy's clash power really needs a boost, and Dismember is starting to not be enough. Also, it has double healing on Eviscerate too, but that is not really relevant. He already has enough healing. Still the best Greg, but only because he feels legerdemain. So that is everything, ID-wise. I would say, I'm going to reiterate, I'm going to bring the tier list and show it up again. The charge IDs gain the most this update that aren't Rose Spanner. All of the W Corps and all of the R Corps are really good at Uptie 4. There's some cool poise stuff at Uptie 4 on Yisang and Rodion, and I would say that I think Sinclair's is cool, but just not viable. Most of the stuff you're going to be uptying is the stuff that was already good, with the exceptions being W Corp Faust, base Heath, I guess. Liu Honglu, and that's basically it. I think I'm gonna say move Don down. Maybe move 7 Yisang down as well. They're already pretty good, and they don't gain a lot from this, so apologies, it's not perfect. I made this in an hour. I'm sorry. But yeah, typically this is what your uptie priorities are going to look like. And the way this tier list works, I should clarify, if you have a character, uptie the ID you like using the most, always. This game is not hard enough to require anything more than that. That's why I have Reindeer uptied. Not that that doesn't gain a huge boost. But yeah, I hope you found this helpful if you've sat through all of it. It's definitely a lot to sit through, I will admit. But thanks for watching this far, if you're here. Again, I really do hope you find this useful. I appreciate you sticking around this long, because it is a pretty boring video in my opinion, but I feel like this is important to get out. I hope you consider liking and subscribing, because it helps me out a lot, and I hope to see you back here again in the next video. Bye!